You kids like risotto? Y'all buckle in, because I got a lot to say on this apron, and I'm really enjoying this project. Hello and welcome. I'm Lindsay Crane, and these are my RetroCraftDreams. At long last, the final season of Stranger Things is upon us. Now, even if you're not a fan or you haven't seen the show, that's okay. One of the things that I love the most about Stranger Things is simply that it feels like a giant love letter to the 80s, and I'm all about that. Every time I watch the show, I'm always drawn to just watching parts in the background. I watch the sets, I watch the costumes. I love taking in all of the details that they were able to incorporate. And I always feel like, although I was very, very young, it always feels like they nailed it really well. And I do occasionally have a keen eye for some of the craft projects that you can see in the background. And there are many things in the show that I would love to recreate. So today I am finally making one. I'm going to make Murray Bauman's apron.
You kids like risotto?
Before we get to the making of it, I did want to talk about it just a little bit because I had kind of a saga trying to source the materials to create my own authentic replica of this original 80s apron. I really wanted to make a screen accurate version of this apron, and tracking down the fabric has proved a challenge. Now, it does not appear on screen for very long, but the Stranger Things Instagram account was kind enough to post additional photos, so I was able to get a pretty good look and break down the origin and the construction of this apron. Let's back up for a second and talk about the apron itself. We have a faux quilt block for the bib and a coordinating calico floral print for the skirt with a patch pocket and a solid color waistband. Because of the pre-printed quilt block, I assumed that it was going to be a cut and sew panel. Cut and sew panels do seem to have been very ubiquitous throughout the 80s. And there might be some social commentary on that. So I spent months looking for cut and sew panel aprons. And I saw a lot of really cute ones, but I wasn't finding this one. And I was starting to get discouraged because I was just having no luck. So I searched for the images again, and lo and behold, somebody on Reddit made one. They had found the original fabric and made their own Murray Bauman apron in blue. And while the original poster did not answer the question as to where the fabric came from, somebody else in the comments had also made one and did answer that question. And I was half right. It was a cut and sew panel, but not for an apron. It was a pillow made by Springs Industries. So armed with this new information, I went back to eBay and continued my search for several more months. I did see one in blue. I decided I wanted a screen accurate version, so I passed up on the blue. I did see one in black, and at long last, I found the green one. So this is the original screen used color. This is a very light blue-green, and it has a front and it has a back. This is the full pillow panel. Do we fit on camera? We probably don't fit on camera. So this is the whole pillow panel. There are also other coordinating fabrics to this pillow panel. I have seen a full actual quilt, cheater quilt, with this as one of the panels and several other quilt blocks, cheater quilt blocks, all in one. After I finally secured my own screen accurate color copy of this fabric, I then realized that I needed the skirt fabric. Close inspection of the Instagram photos do show just enough for me to be confident that this right here is the print used for that fabric with this cabbage rose design. So I went back to eBay, now only looking for a floral print from Springs Industries, which is a lot harder to find because first of all, it's a floral print in a sea of floral prints. Would have been much, much nicer to have looked for them both at the same time. Would have increased my search time. I know that it's out there. I did come across one in blue, but I had already bought the green, so couldn't do anything with that. And yeah, lo and behold, I still have not been able to find this fabric, which, by the way, the use of this print in the original apron is a huge clue to me that that apron probably was made in the 80s, because the coordinating fabrics were probably purchased together, because it gets harder and harder to get coordinating fabrics as time goes on. So I was considering, just using a different fabric, but this is a very hard color to match, especially shopping online. And I feel like I really would prefer to make a screen accurate version with this pillow block. So I'm going to save this for when I find the actual print fabric and I can make an actual screen accurate version. So what am I making instead? I'm gonna make the upside down one. I found it in black, although I still don't have the cabbage rose floral print for this one. Black is a much easier color to match. And I actually have pulled this from my stash. This is also by Springs Industries, so they are very possibly contemporary. So I'm going to make the upside down version of Murray Bauman's apron. We are making it in black with the identical farm animal cheater quilt block. This is kind of almost a tutorial in that you should be able to follow along and learn how to make this apron for yourself. But please bear in mind that I have not made this before. I am figuring it out for myself right now, so I'm not sure just how clear all of my instructions will be, but I will do my best, and hopefully you can make an apron for yourself. For this project, you will need your chosen square, whether a cheater quilt block, an actual quilt block, or a pillow you would like to give a second life to. A piece of thin quilt batting large enough to cover your square. Mine is specially designed for garments, although something heat resistant could also be handy. Approximately half a yard of a solid or contrasting fabric for the pocket and waistband. Approximately 1 yard of a coordinating print, longer if you would like a bigger skirt or fuller gathers. And pre-gathered eyelet, long enough to go around 3 sides of your square. Using the grid in the design as a guideline, I cut my square 2 lines out from where the edge appears in the photo. This resulted in a square that was a little over 15 inches. Using this piece, I then cut my black backing fabric and my quilt batting to the same size. To determine the length for the skirt, I held it to my waist to find the length I liked, which was about knee length. I think I ended up at 24 inches, plus a seam allowance at the top and 2 inches for the bottom hem. The width of the skirt is the full length of my piece of fabric, which was just under a yard. Next, I needed to measure for the neck strap, also made with the floral print. I decided somewhat arbitrarily that I wanted a fixed length neck strap, although close inspection of the single seam in which the apron appears does show that it is tied. To do that, I would simply lengthen this piece and then cut 2. I positioned my tape measure at the corners of my quilt block and adjusted it until I was happy with where the bib was hitting, being sure to test that it still fit over my head. This pillow square is rather large, so I tried to make the neck strap short enough to raise the bottom to my waist, but as I didn't actually notice until later on, in the picture the original apron does cut off the bottom of the square, so that might be something to bear in mind as you make your own. I added seam allowance at the ends to get my final length. I ended up with 18 inches. For the width, I wanted it to be 2 inches, so I doubled that and added seam allowance along both long edges. Finally, I used my solid black fabric to cut the waistband ties and pocket. I made my pocket piece 9.5 by 6.5 inches because it seemed like a good size. The waistband in the original is an odd construction with a taller center section and the ties coming from either end of that. I wanted to make mine the same as in the original, but you can simplify yours by making it a single piece all the way across. For mine, based on the original, I determined that the taller portion extended about 2 inches beyond the bib on either side. So I cut it 4 inches wider than the bib for a total of 19 inches. I settled on 1.5 inches for the final height and added my seam allowance to that. I cut 2 of these, a front and a back. Finally, I cut 2 waist ties at 1 inch by 24 inches. And with that, all the pieces are cut. I began by folding the neckband in half lengthwise, right sides together, and sewing it into a tube. I did the same for the waist ties, using a minimal seam allowance, but also turned the corner, sewing them all the way closed at one end. I pressed the neckband seam open before turning and pressing it again with the seam running down the center of the underside. I clipped the corners of the ends of the waist ties, cursed myself for not having a tube turner, turned and pressed these as well. Then I moved on to the bib. I marked where the neckband should be placed based on where it appeared relative to the animals in the original before they got covered up by the ruffle. Since this has so many layers, I decided to sew the ruffle and neckband in separately before building the rest of my quilt sandwich. Beginning at the bottom corner of the bib, I pinned the pre-gathered eyelet along the seam line with the ruffle facing in and the gathered hem within the seam allowance, taking extra care when going around the corners to keep the ruffle on the inside. I carried the eyelet up and around the top 3 sides until I reached the opposite bottom corner. I pinned the neckband on top facing in with my seam facing up. Then I sewed around these 3 sides as close to the edge of the eyelet as I could. When I reached the neck strap, I added a little back stitch at each edge for reinforcement. Once that was done, I could add the other layers without fear of anything moving out of place. I placed the black fabric on top, followed by the batting. I sewed it again around the same 3 sides, just inside the first seam. Then I clipped the corners, graded the seam allowance, and turned the whole thing. I had assembled it this way so that I could see my first seam line to ensure I stayed inside it. However, if I had put the batting on the other side behind the quilt block, I may have gotten a smoother, less bubbly finish at the edges, but once it was pressed, the difference was negligible. Now it was time for the skirt. First, I added small hems to the 2 sides, followed by a 2-inch hem at the bottom. I then prepared the pocket by sewing down the top hem and turning and pressing the other 3 sides. I determined the placement of the pocket by holding the skirt to my waist and pinning it where my fingers could just reach the bottom edge. After taking a moment to ensure that the pocket was squared to the side and bottom edges, I top stitched it in place. With the pocket in place, it was finally time to gather the skirt. My sewing machine gets testy if I mess with it too much, so I gathered it by hand with a long running stitch. To add the waistband, I marked the center of both the waistband and the top edge of the skirt and pinned the center marks together, as well as the 2 edges. I used my gathering stitch to fit the skirt into the waistband, spreading the gathers evenly as I pinned them into place. Once I was satisfied, I placed the second waistband piece on top, matching the center and sides. Now, here's where I should have done things differently. I should have sewn the waist ties into each end first and then gathered the skirt in between. This would have helped make sure the skirt went all the way to the edges of the waistband without getting caught up in the seam allowance. But because I put the skirt in first, I did have to do a bit of picking at the ends.
Frick, I did do it wrong.
I rolled the skirt back and pinned it out of the way of the seam allowance. At each end of the waistband, I inserted one of the ties sandwiched inside the waistband, right sides together. Now I needed to re-sew the bit I had ripped back, sew down the tie at the end, and I decided to turn the corner again and sew the top edges of the waistband together for about an inch. Not far enough to get in the way of adding the bib, but just far enough to give the corner a nice finish and to help when turning my final seam allowance under, as you will see momentarily. After making sure the skirt was no longer caught in the side seam, I clipped the corners and turned the waistband right side out. Finally, it was time to attach the bib. I remarked the center of the waistband, as well as the center of the bib. Because I wanted my seam to hit on a specific line in the design, I transferred that line to the back for a sewing line, using that rather than a set seam allowance. I positioned the bib, right sides together, to the front piece of the waistband and pinned it in place. I flipped it over and pinned the back of the waistband down out of the way to make sure it wouldn't get caught up in my seam, since I was going to be sewing it from the other side. I was then able to attach the bib to the waistband. At last, I was on the final step. I flipped the bib up and tucked the bottom edge inside at the back of the waistband, making sure the ruffles were also all the way tucked in. I folded the seam allowance under using my previous sewing line as a guide, pressing as I went to help it stay in place. And here you have a couple of options. I decided to sew it down with a simple top stitch, but you could also slip stitch it down for a cleaner finish on the front. And with that, the apron is done. I don't know about you, but I think this is stinking adorable. But it's not quite right. The original maker was 100% correct to cut off the bottom of the square. Happily, this is only an apron and is easily adjusted when I wear it. So I can have it both ways, because I'd hate to completely destroy the bottom animals by cutting them off. They're just too cute. And now I'm not so sure what I'll do for my screen accurate version, but I don't have to worry about that just yet. While I have been able to deduce that the apron used on screen was in fact made in the 80s, what I have not been able to figure out is if it was made from a pattern or if it was the creation of the original maker. I'm gonna keep looking into this because I'm tickled by it. I love the idea that a woman in the 80s saw this fabric for a pillow and thought, I'm gonna make an apron out of that. I love it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you make your own version of this apron. I'd love to see them. You can share with me on Bluesky, Instagram, Facebook, or Reddit. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.